Hello and welcome back everyone to PKIdeas for another episode of How to Play. And today what we're going to look at is the knight. So previously we had looked at the pawn, how the pawn moves, two moves at the very start or one move at the very start and then one straight afterwards. And then we looked at how pawns capture like so. Then we looked at en passant, where when the pawn moves twice in the start, this pawn can capture like that. And then we talked about the pawn promotion. When the pawn reaches the 8th rank respectively of white and black, then it can become either a knight, a bishop, a rook, or a queen. Okay, so that was pretty much the pawn. Now let's just talk about the knight. A knight is a special piece in that it is the only piece that can jump over other pieces. So what do I mean? Let's take a snippet of the starting position like so. So in the starting position we have 3 pawns like this and a knight right here. And now we're going to see all the moves that the knight can do. The knight can move to e2, it can move to f3, and it can move to h3. So in this position you have the knight on g1 moving to f3 over these 2 pawns like this. So that is called jumping over pieces, and the knight is the only piece that can do that. Now let's just get into how the knight actually moves, because we learned something special about the knight but we don't actually know how it moves yet. So let's just go through how the knight moves. A knight is supposed to move 2 squares in any direction and then 1 square in a 90-degree rotation. So here we have 1, 2, and then we have 1 square in a 90-degree direction or 90-degree turn. So easier is I'll show it with arrows here. So you have 2 squares that way, and then you can go 1 square that way or 1 square that way. Then the knight will either land here or here. Now let's try another direction. Here you have 2 squares that way, moving either right or to the left, and then you have to go to these 2 squares. We do the same thing on the top like so, and then we do the same thing to the left like so. So here we can see that the knight is moving in a sort of an L shape. So you have 2 squares that way, 1 square that way. And a simple way to remember this is by using Josh Waitzkin's saying by doing a step, step, side. So here you have the knight going step, step, side, step, step, side, step, step, side, step, step, side, and then you have to repeat everything over here. So that is pretty much how the knight moves. Now in terms of capturing, the knight can capture in an L shape as well. So when a piece occupies a square which the knight can move to, the knight can capture that piece. So here you have 2 pawns on d7 and f7, and you have a knight on e5. The knight on e5 can capture the pawn on f7 like so, or it can capture the pawn on d7 like so. So that is pretty much how knights capture. Now let's look at a simple exercise which will help you in moving the knight and simply calculating how the knight moves, as well as help you find out how many moves it takes to get to a certain piece, or how many times the knight has to move to get to a certain piece. So let's put a knight in the very corner of the board. So now in this position we are going to look at how many moves it takes the knight to get to the other corner of the board, the h1 square. So can you please pause the video and try and find out how many moves it takes the knight to get to the h1 square. If you've calculated it now, you may find that it is actually 5 moves. So how the knight will move? Let's see, the knight can go to c2, next it can go to d4, then it can go to e2, and then it can go to g3, then it can go to h1. So when a knight is at the corner of the board, to get to the other corner, which is vertically or horizontally, so that includes the a8 square, it takes 5 moves to get there. So this is simply in terms of how fast a knight can get in terms of moves from a1 to h1 or a1 to a8. Now from a1 to h8, that is a completely different story. and with that takes about 6 moves, and I'll show you the reason why. So you have the knight on a1, you can go to c2, and then you can go to d4, then you can go to e6, f8, g6, h8. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 moves. So you can see for a knight to get from one corner of the board to the corner that is diagonally opposite that knight, it takes 6 moves. Next, we're gonna look at putting the knight in the center, and you're gonna pause the video and you're gonna find out how many moves it takes the knight to reach the c6 square. Okay, so the answer is actually 4 moves. And the reason why it's 4 moves is because the knight has to go to f6, then it goes to d5, e7, then it goes to c6. So it is a rule that when a knight wants to go to a square which is 2 squares diagonally away from the knight, it takes a minimum of 4 moves. Now keep in mind that if there's maybe a pawn on e7, the knight can't really go to f6, so it has to try another maneuver like playing knight to c3, knight to d5, knight to b4, and then knight to c6. So he has to try that maneuver, but the idea is simply the same. So that is the knight trying to get to a square that is 2 squares diagonally away from itself. So now let's go on to a capturing in a chain. So I'm going to make a position and you're going to find out how to take all the pieces on the board without actually making a move which is not a capture. So let me quickly set up this position. Okay, so here is the position. Now take a bit of time. The only piece that is allowed to move is the white knight on c3. So black doesn't really get a move in this position, and you have to move the knight as many moves as possible and capture all the pieces that are on the board. So I will give you a bit of time to think about this by I will give you a bit of time if you pause this video, and then you can find out how exactly this is possible. Now remember, black doesn't get a move here. Okay, so here is the position. Let's look at the solution. So knight is on c3. Let's look at all the pieces that the knight can capture. Here we have a knight move here, 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 to b1, a2, and a4. So the only piece that the knight can capture is the pawn on d5. So knight takes d5. If we repeat the same thing, knight takes e7, knight takes g6, knight takes h4, knight takes g2, knight takes e1, knight takes c2, knight takes a1, knight takes b3, a5, b7, d8, f7, h6, knight takes g4, and knight takes h2. And so the white knight cleaned up the whole board. Now, if you were able to do this without actually moving the knight from the very start, that is an extremely amazing achievement. And if you weren't able to do this, make sure that you keep on practicing it with positions like this so that you can actually manage to do this without moving the knight from the very start of the board. This way you'll be able to calculate exactly how many moves a knight takes to reach a certain square, which is quite important in chess because knight endings are common. So it's important to learn how the knight moves. So that is pretty much everything with the knight. We all know that the knight is worth 3 pawns, and hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you liked it, please leave a like down below. So please do that, leave a like if you liked it, and that is pretty much it for this episode of How to Play. If you haven't already, please subscribe, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.